Hello, welcome to my videos on commas for writers. This is the second video. The first video is posted. I do need to make a couple of corrections for that one. I kind of messed up on. I was excited and I was calling complex sentences compound, but we'll get to that here in just a moment. Okay, hello, and welcome to my new office, or it's the old office. I just kind of moved things around where I have my backgrounds up, my book covers and things. Right now, there's a bit of glare on it, so I haven't got everything worked out yet, but I'm working on it. At least it's not a bunch of junk and printers and stuff behind me now. But anyway, my background is the least important thing that we have going right now. What we need to do is work on commas. So I'm going to finish up the commas. We left off with clauses last time, and we will go back and look at the clauses a little bit because I did make a mistake there. I just misspoke. I was calling, we'll go back to clauses here. I was calling dependent or compound sentences. I was calling them compound, and they were actually complex. So let me go back and give you the definition of these so they're correct. Now, no one actually corrected me on these. I just happened to realize it when I was making this video. I was like, oh no, I was calling the clauses compound last time and they're complex. So anyway, a complex sentence is a sentence that has an independent clause connected to a dependent clause with a subordinating conjunction. So if you say, because I love chocolate cake, I ate the whole cake or ate the entire slice, that's a complex sentence. Okay, when you put because or use a subordinating conjunction. A compound sentence is a sentence that is two independent clauses. In other words, two complete sentences, and you combine those two complete sentences and you join them with a coordinating conjunction. And the coordinating conjunction, I'll go ahead and I'll show you here real quick. It's better to show than to tell because if you're like me, you might be visual. You have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Now, if you take the first letter from each one of these 7 conjunctions, you get fanboys. It spells out the word fanboys. So Fanboys, fanboys. So there's only 7 of them, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And the way they work is if you say something like, I love chocolate cake, okay? And that's a sentence. And you say, I ate the whole slice. All right. Now, if you look at these 2 sentences that I just wrote on the whiteboard here, or wrote on the slide here, they are 2 complete independent clauses. They're 2 complete sentences. You have a subject I. First one, the verb is love. The second one, the verb is ate. They're 2 sentences. Now, the way you connect these is you use a coordinating conjunction. You could put a comma, and then you put the coordinating conjunction. I love chocolate cake, so I ate the whole slice. All right. This is called a compound sentence. So compound sentence, the clause I love chocolate cake is still there. It's still independent. The clause I ate the whole slice, that's still a sentence. It's still independent. So it's 2 independent clauses connected with a coordinating conjunction is a compound sentence. The one I was talking about in the last video, where you have a dependent clause connected to an independent clause, and the dependent clause has a subordinating conjunction that makes it subordinate to the other clause, that is called a complex sentence. And you can have both these together. You could have what's called a compound complex. You can have 2 independent clauses, and then you can let me see if I can make this into one. Like okay, let's see, because I am silly, I love chocolate cake, so I ate the whole slice. Yeah, it doesn't really work very well. But anyway, the point is you could put you could open it with a, like, let's see, what would be a good one? Since I am See, I want to put and in there. That's what the problem is. Since I love food, I love chocolate cake. So I did the whole slice. I don't know. Anyway, you can make a complex compound. You can put them all together and make a big huge sentence. But as you can tell, I don't do that very often in my own writing, because I find it to be a bit tedious to do that. I mean, I do sometimes when it calls for it, and it just flows naturally. I don't sit there and try to do it, because I think a complex, if you have simple sentences and then complex sentences and then compound sentences, and you have them all mixed together, that's called varying your sentences, and that's just fine. If you have a compound complex and you put one of those in there, if you have too many of those, they start getting a little crazy. They start getting a little bit, that's a little bit too much, I think. So if you have simple sentences, a simple sentence would be like, my name is John. That's a simple sentence. Or it just has one. It can have a compound predicate, which is compound verb, or it can have a compound subject, two nouns, or a noun and pronoun. But it just has that in like one verb or something. Like Jack and Jill ran up the hill would be a simple sentence with a compound subject. So anyway, that gets into another video. We'll do that some other time. But the point is that you should have a simple sentences, you should have complex sentences, and you should have compound sentences. That's called varying your sentences. So that's fine. You don't have to necessarily get into the compound complex. As you can tell, I don't do them very often. So because I couldn't do one now. But I mean, I could if I sit here and thought long enough, but who wants to sit here and listen to me write sentences for an hour? So anyway, that's what I wanted to say to finish up the clauses, to get out of the problem that I made last week, where I was calling complex sentences compound when it should have been calling them complex. So I just kind of figured everybody understood what a compound sentence was already anyway. So sorry, that was my fault. All right. So this video go around, we're going to finish up the commas, where to put commas in phrases. Now, there are some phrases that don't have commas at all, like verb phrases. Verb phrases don't have commas, because a verb phrase is just a helping verb plus a main verb. So, like is running or has been going. Those, of course, don't have commas because they are the verb of the sentence. So they don't need commas. Infinitive phrases don't have a lot of commas in them either. And we'll talk about those here in a moment. Prepositional phrases, they do have commas, and that's what we're going to talk about first here. All right, this is just showing you what a verb phrase is again. John is running in the race. Is running is the verb phrase. Or Jill has been going to the gym. Has been going is the verb phrase. And of course, you don't have commas around those. Because a verb phrase is just a helping verb plus a main verb. Now, when you're in 3rd or 4th grade and the teacher was like, I'll give you a gold star if you tell me what the verb is, and you say running, and they're like, yes, gold star. And then you just leave out the helping verbs has been running. Well, now that you're older and more sophisticated, the whole verb of that sentence is actually has been running, not just running. You have to include the helping verbs now because they're part of the predicate, which is the verb, part of the sentence. All right, prepositional phrases. They're very simple to punctuate. A preposition is a word that shows you a relationship between two nouns, or a noun, a pronoun, or basically anything that's a person, place, thing, or idea, or as a pronoun. So the way it works is you have two nouns in the sentence. You have one that's called the object of the preposition. It's the one that comes after the preposition. In this case, it's bed. But you have this sentence, the dog was on the bed. Okay, the preposition is on because on is the word telling you where the dog is in relation to the bed. It's telling you where the subject, the dog, is in relation to the bed. It's on the bed. So on is the preposition. So it works the same way if the dog is under the bed, the dog is over the bed, jumped over the bed, the dog is beside the bed. Wherever that dog is in relation to the bed, that's the word that tells you that's the preposition. All right, prepositions, that's called a spatial preposition because it tells you where in space the other thing is in relation to the other thing. You can also do it with time, like reading class is after math class. After is the preposition because it's telling you when reading class is in relation to math. It's after. So there's only about 5 of those that we use on a regular basis. We use after, before, during, until, and like at. I'll be there at 7. At is a preposition. Or I'm not going to be there until 7. Reading class is after math class. Reading class is before math class. You probably wouldn't say reading class is during math class, but you would say something like, that'd be weird, but you'd say something like, I sneezed during math class or something. So the sneeze in relation to the math class, you sneeze during. All right. The other way is if you're not showing space and you're not showing time, you're just showing a relationship between two things, like that ball belongs to Mr. Dillard. Okay, belong to Mr. Dillard. So you're showing a relationship of the ball that belongs and who it belongs to, Mr. Dillard. That's not showing you where in space it is. It's not telling you where or when it is. It's just telling you who it belongs to. So that's also a preposition. So the word to followed by a noun is a preposition. The word to, followed by a noun is preposition, or a pronoun is a preposition. I'm saying that on purpose because when we get to infinitives also have the word to in them. But anyway, we'll get that in a minute. Right now, we're talking about prepositional phrases. So how you punctuate a prepositional phrase is if the prepositional phrase opens a sentence, and you should be seeing a pattern by now, like with dependent clauses. If the dependent clause opens the sentence, there's a comma after the dependent clause. If a prepositional phrase opens the sentence, there's a comma after the prepositional phrase if it's 4 words or more. If it's 3 words or fewer, usually you don't have to put a comma. That's the rule of thumb. If you do, no one's going to count it wrong. No one's going to say, oh, you can't do that. There's only 3 words there. No, like over the hills we traveled, if you notice it doesn't have a comma, it's really not needed because it's short and we understand. It's the same thing as saying we traveled over the hills. I mean, you can reverse it back. It's the same way. Over the Rocky Mountains we traveled, we have a comma there because it's 4 words. Basically what this is doing is it's saying that if it gets too big and it starts getting confusing, you put a comma. Or if there's 2 prepositional phrases that open the sentence together, like at the end of a long day, you're going to put a comma after the second prepositional phrase. So to recap that, 3 words or fewer, no comma, okay, in the prepositional phrase if it opens the sentence, the introductory phrase. If it has 4 words or more, you do put a comma, and if it has 2 or more phrases together, 2 or more prepositional phrases together, you put a comma after the second phrase. All right. I differentiated these because I made one red and one green, so that you'd see that these are 2 prepositional phrases at the end of a long day. It's the same thing as saying we relax in front of the fireplace at the end of a long day. Although if you put the main clause first and then you put the prepositional phrases, there is no comma. Just like with the complex sentences, it has to the prepositional phrase or phrases have to be opening the sentence for you to put a comma. All right, so that's the way you put a comma if you open with a prepositional phrase or if you open with prepositional phrases. All right. If you have an infinitive phrase, infinitives are the word to plus a verb, like to run, to jump. They're different from preposition to because a preposition to has to be followed by a noun, like I want to go to the store. So I put this in here on purpose. I like to go to the store on Mondays. All right, I as the subject, like as the verb, to go is the infinitive, and then here's to again, to the store is a prepositional phrase. Because to here is followed by a noun, therefore that's a preposition. The to here is followed by a verb. This is an infinitive. Okay, and technically, to go to the store, that whole thing is an infinitive phrase modifying like. But we'll get into more of that later. That's kind of like the more higher up grammar. But for now, if you see the word to plus a verb, that's an infinitive. What you need to remember, you don't have to worry about commas or anything, but what you need to remember with infinitives is don't split the infinitive. In other words, don't put anything between to and the verb, like Star Trek does down here. To boldly go where no one has gone before. To boldly go, that's a split infinitive. It should be to go boldly where no one has gone before. If you put something between the to and the verb in the infinitive, it's called a split infinitive, like I said. It used to be a big deal. It's not so much a big deal today. So you're not going to run into a lot of commas with infinitives like this. To go to the store on Mondays is better than going on Tuesdays. To serve is my greatest pleasure. All right, let's face it. We're probably not going to use infinitives here. We're probably going to say going to the store. We're going to be using like gerund. Like going to the store on Mondays is better than going on Tuesdays. Or serving is my greatest pleasure. So you're going to change this from an infinitive into probably a gerund. A gerund is an ing word that doesn't have a helping verb that acts like a noun. So serving is my greatest pleasure would be better than to serve is my greatest pleasure. Gerunds and infinitives they're both called verbals. They both look or kind of act like verbs, but they actually act like something else. And most of the time, you're going to, in a situation like this, you're going to use a gerund and not an infinitive. So just the biggest thing to remember about infinitives, like I said, if you're wanting to punctuate, just remember don't split them. All right. You don't have to worry too much about commas. Appositives and participles are what we're going to look at next. Participial phrases and appositive phrases. Both the positives and participles can be either one word or it could be a phrase. So in this case, I've got both. I've got a phrase here: Fred, my next door neighbor, mows his grass every week, and I have just a one word appositive. My next door neighbor, Fred, mows his grass every week. Okay, so here is the problem with positives. Yes, I'm taking a breath because this sounds so backwards, and people get this confused all the time. But within a positive, if you don't need the information in the appositive, you do need a comma. If you do need the information in the appositive, you don't need a comma. And it sounds backwards. So if you look at the first example, Fred, my next door neighbor, mows his grass every week. My next door neighbor is what's called non-essential information, because if you take out my next door neighbor and you just say Fred mows his grass every week, it's fine. You don't need that. You don't need my next door neighbor in there. So because you don't need that in there, that's non-essential, you put commas around it because it's non-essential information. Now in the second one, it's the same sentence, basically. My next door neighbor, Fred, mows his grass every week. If you notice, there's no commas. There's no comma around Fred, the appositive. And the reason why is because in the first sentence, you're already telling us who you're talking about. You're talking about Fred. So we already know which neighbor you're pointing out. Okay, so we don't need to have the part that says my next door neighbor. We don't need that because we already know you're talking about Fred. All right, in the second one, when you're saying my next door neighbor, you could have your across the street is Jill, next door this way is John, two houses down is from Fred is Joan and whatever. So you have several neighbors. So you're having to name the neighbor because you have more than one neighbor. So my next door neighbor, Fred, mows his grass every week. That's called essential information. You have lots of neighbors. So in that sense, you have to tell us which neighbor you're talking about. You can't just say my next door neighbor mows his grass every week, because that begs the question, which neighbor are you talking about? Which neighbor mows his grass every week? So the first one, you're already naming the neighbor, Fred. So we don't need the appositive. So you have commas. And the second one, since you have more than one next door neighbor or more than one neighbor, you have to tell us which one you're talking about. So Fred is essential information in that sentence. All right. So it works the same way with husbands and wives. If you have more than likely in the United States, polygamy is illegal here. So if you have more than one wife, you would obviously you'd have to tell us which one. It would be essential information. But because we only usually have one spouse, if you say my husband John, you would put commas around John because you only have one husband. We know it's John. So that's non-essential. Okay. If you have like two sisters and you're saying my sister has twins, then you have to tell us which sister you're talking about because you have two sisters. So you say my sister Jill, and that would mean that Jill would not have commas. But if you had two sisters and you're saying my sister has twins, wait, that's that backwards? Yeah, if you have two sisters and you say my sister has twins, you have to tell us which sister you're talking about. So you'd put my sister Jill has twins, and that would not have commas. But if you only have one sister and she has twins, and you say my sister has twins, my sister Jill has twins, well, you only have one sister, so we know it's Jill. So you'd put commas around that. And it sounds so backwards. People have trouble with it all the time. If you're not quite getting that, just rewind the video up a little bit and then write this stuff down, or look at the information or screenshot or whatever and think about it for a minute, because it does take a moment to sink in that if you don't need the information, you do need a comma. If you do need the information, you don't need a comma. All right. Kind of works that way with participles too. Participles, okay. Gerunds, we talked about gerunds. We talked about gerunds. We talked about infinitives. Participles are the third verbal. Okay. Verbals are words that look like verbs in the sentence, but they're not the verb of the sentence. They're a verbal. They're doing something else. Gerunds act like nouns, right? Like going to the store on Mondays is my favorite thing to do. Going is a gerund. All right, it looks like a verb, but it's actually the subject of the sentence. Okay, to go, I like to go to the store. To go is an infinitive. Like is the verb in the sentence. To go is not the verb, it's an infinitive. Well, what a participle does, it looks like a verb, but it's actually an adjective, or it acts like an adjective. It's not really an adjective. It would be like, hey, look at my mosaic of shattered tiles. All right, you're telling us what kind of tiles they are. They're shattered tiles. Now, normally the word shattered would be a verb. I shattered the window, right? But because you're telling us what kind of tiles they are, shattered tiles, you're describing the tiles. That's what adjectives do. They describe things. So it's looks like a verb, but it's actually describing something, so it's acting like an adjective. We can't call it an adjective right straight out because it's not an adjective. It's a verb. We can't call it a verb because it's not acting as a verb. It's not showing action. It's describing what kind of tiles, which is what an adjective does. So we have a specific word for it. We call it a participle. All right. So the reason why we have participles is because when you first learn to write in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, you write things like, the tornado hit our house. The tornado was scary. The tornado blew through our town. You might write like that. Well, you can combine those sentences. You can say, the tornado forecasted earlier, the tornado, the scary wind rummaged through our town, or, you can combine them together by using participles. You can put them together. So the way a participle works is, like in the example here, you can have a sentence like, Fred was running down the street. Fred was yelling and screaming like a madman. Okay. Or Fred ran down the street. Fred yelled was yelling and screaming like a madman. Okay, you can combine these by taking the Fred was part out because we already have it. Fred was running down the street. Fred was yelling and screaming like a madman. You take out the first Fred was and then change and then just keep the running and say running down the street. Fred was yelling and screaming like a madman. Okay, if that was confusing, let me say it one more time. Instead of saying Fred was running down the street, Fred was yelling and screaming like a madman. You can take away the first Fred was because you take away the subject and the helping verb, and just use the action verb running down the street. Fred. So this whole thing is what's called a participial phrase because it's telling you what Fred is doing. He's running down the street. Running down the street, Fred. So it's describing Fred. Was yelling and screaming like a madman. So this is a participle or participial phrase. Now, if I say, look at these shattered tiles, shattered is just a participle because it's one word describing one noun. This is a participial phrase because this whole phrase, running down the street, is telling you what Fred's doing. So this is a phrase, okay? It doesn't matter, and if it's just a participle by itself, hey, look at these shattered tiles, there's no comma in that. Except after hey, comma, look at these shattered tiles. There's no comma after shattered was my point. In this one, since we've opened the sentence with a participial phrase, running down the street, there's always a comma there. Running down the street, comma, Fred yelled, okay, was yelling. Commas are not needed if the information is essential, if the participle's in the middle of the sentence. If it opens the sentence, there is always a comma after the participial phrase, if it opens the sentence. In this case, it's in the middle. The tornado forecasted earlier did not hit our area. The way this would work is it would be like the tornado was forecasted earlier. The tornado did not hit our area. So we're putting them together and saying the tornado forecasted earlier did not hit our area. And that's essential information. So we don't put commas around it. If it was non-essential, just merely adding information to the sentence, you'd put commas. Hope that makes sense because people get that backwards all the time because it sounds backwards. Okay, there's one other thing that you should remember about participles is don't make a dangling participle. So what's a dangling participle? You probably watched a TV show or a movie and they say, oh, that's a dangling participle, and you didn't understand what they were talking about because no one does hardly. Don't feel bad. It took me a while, but and I was like, oh, all a dangling participle means, it means that the participial phrase or the participle is modifying the wrong noun. Because remember, adjectives only modify nouns, pronouns, or gerunds. So if it's modifying anything but what it's actually talking about, it's modifying the wrong noun, pronoun, or gerund, it's a dangling participle. So here's an example. You could say, the road was filled with deep potholes. The school bus driver drove down the road, and you're combining the two sentences. So you're saying filled with deep potholes, like I taught you in the last slide. Filled with deep potholes, the school bus driver drove down the road. No, dangling participle, because in this sentence, it looks like you're saying filled with deep potholes is what the school bus driver is. filled with deep potholes, the school bus driver. The school bus driver isn't filled with deep potholes. The road is, right? So it's modifying the wrong noun. It's modifying the bus driver and not the road. So in this case, you would say the school bus driver drove down the road filled with deep potholes, right? Because we want it to be modifying. We want filled with deep potholes to be modifying the road, to be describing the road, not describing the bus driver. The bus driver is not filled with deep potholes. Okay, that's a dangling participle. It just means you have to be careful with those. Make sure that the participial phrase is modifying the correct noun and you're not saying something ridiculous like let's say Sally, the altar lady, will come up and lay an egg on the altar. All right. It makes it sound like the altar lady is going to go up there like a chicken and lay an egg. Or Sally at church laid an egg on the altar. It makes it sound like she's laid the egg when you're trying to say she went up and put an egg on the altar, and you're modifying the wrong noun. Jill went up to the altar and laid an egg, or same thing. It makes it sound like Jill's laying the egg. I would say something like Jill walked up to the altar and placed an egg or something, or something. But anyway, just make sure that you're not saying something ridiculous with participles. The examples I was just giving with the laying an egg thing didn't really fit, but you get the point. All right. The school bus driver drove down the road filled with deep potholes. This filled with deep potholes is telling you about the road and not, anyway, you get it. Okay, you get it. I get it. All right, so that's it. We are done. That's pretty much all that you would use commas for. There might be a couple things here and there. If you have any questions about commas or any kind of grammar, put them down in the comments. I'll read them and I will either answer them in the comments or I'll make a video out of it. I'm going to make a lot more videos on writing and things like when to use was and were and things like that. It's called subjunctive mood. We're gonna delve into that kind of stuff. I'm going to give you a lot of craft advice on how to craft your work, and not just merely how do you publish and how many books do you publish, but I'm going to give you the actual how to do the actual work. So my next video, just to give you a preview, it's going to be about something I've not seen in these other AuthorTube videos. There might be one out there somewhere. I just haven't come across it. It's about imposter syndrome, which is kind of I guess it might be kind of a form of depression in a way. It's a psychological thing where you have been inspired by other books or you've been inspired by other authors and you've written something, and then you feel like a fraud and you feel like you published it and people love it, and you think it's only a matter of time before they figure out I'm a fraud because I can't really write that well. They're mistaken, or there's a little bit more to it than that, but I'm just kind of paraphrasing because I don't want this video to end up being too long. But we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, something that fits into imposter syndrome a little bit that we're going to talk about. It has to do with self-publishing. Sometimes people get the imposter syndrome because they feel like self-publishing isn't actual publishing, like there's some sort of actual publishing. Self-publishing is actual publishing. If you're self-published, you are published. You are a published author. Lots of famous authors have self-published. Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, Virginia Woolf, Mark Twain, and I will give you specific examples. All of them have published, self-published. Either they made their own imprint or their own publishing company, or they just spent their own money and published. The only thing you shouldn't do publishing-wise is go to a vanity press, vanity publishing. What that is you should never, ever, ever, ever pay anyone to publish. You shouldn't have to pay somebody that does all the work for you and publishes for you. That's no. You can write the story and you can publish on all these places for free, or if you submit to a traditional publisher and they publish, they're not going to charge you. They're going to give you money. You want them to give you money. Now, I'm not saying that you can't make, posters or book covers or something. You usually do have to kind of pay for that stuff if you can't do it yourself. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actual act of publishing. All right, but anyway, we'll talk about that in the next video when we talk about imposter syndrome. So please don't hesitate to leave comments down in the comment section about any kind of grammar that you might have a question about. And I will be seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.